All right, it has been a minute and I am glad to be back. Welcome to Mixology, where go-to-market strategy, sales excellence, and AI innovation blend together for maximum revenue impact. I'm Heath. Today we're talking about one of the most dangerous assumptions in modern sales, and it's about AI efficiency automatically equaling effectiveness, which I love this conversation because it's going to have some good debate. Every sales leader is told like the same promise. AI tools will make your team faster, more productive, more profitable. But like the uncomfortable truth is that many teams are using AI to actually become incredibly efficient in the wrong activities, creating a false sense of progress. And this is where, revenue then starts to stagnate. We don't realize it beforehand. And so today I'm joined by Richard. Man, you've seen the efficiency trap destroy go-to-market teams, and you know how to avoid it. And so being the founder of Moxie GTM, which is a relationship-led growth if I could speak English, consultancy that's helping companies navigate the AI revolution in sales today, right? Mm-hmm. And so based off our conversation, I was like, you're the perfect person to bring in because you have a unique and probably very diverse perspective of like this efficiency versus effectiveness debate. And so what I believe makes your insights like super invaluable is that we're just not going to theorize today. And I think a lot of the conversation historically has been around theory because very few organizations have actually known how to implement this. You've been in the trenches, you've watched the teams either optimize themselves into relevance or optimize themselves into irrelevance. So man, before we dig in, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'll give you the story that helps you understand kind of the evolution of my career as well as the evolution of go-to-market and outbound. But I started my career as an SDR where I was making 100 cold calls a day. And, around 10 years ago, this was really just calling off of spreadsheets. We didn't have Clay. I think at most we had some email marketing automation. But really, it was about pounding the pavement with cold calls and like manual emails that we sent from Microsoft Office. So even before the days of Gmail. And really, since then, I have been working at Bay Area early stage SaaS companies as one of the first or the first go-to-market hire. And when I think back to the last 10 years or so, I would say 8 out of those 10 years, it was very much rinse and repeat when it comes to your traditional playbook for sales. So you would, hire some AEs, hire some SDRs. You would get like a license to Zoom info, and then you would have like this 15-step sequence. And you knew that, okay, if I email 1,000 people, maybe 5 to 10% would respond, and then out of that percent, we'll have some folks that book a meeting, and out of people who book a meeting, we know that we can convert. It was just like very much this idea of, predictable revenue model. But what I would say probably in the last 2 years, I think it was probably around like mid 2022, I remember at my last company, we built up the same playbook, and about 6 months in, everything just stopped working. And we first thought, okay, maybe it's because, this was around Easter, spring break. Maybe people weren't really responding because they were out of office. But after a few weeks of trying everything to get our outbound engine working again, just nothing seemed to work. And what I realized is that moment in around mid 2022 was when everything changed for the entire market. Because I think at that time, what you had is you had this mass adoption of these sales engagement platforms like Outreach and SalesLoft. You had the commoditization of third-party data. You could get anyone's email. And then you also just had this huge rush of these tech startups. So you have like more competition. So every single channel is saturated. And, in my early days of an SDR, I knew if I really did my research and I really personalized and made relevance to my email, I had a really good chance of cutting through the noise. But now, because of the wide range of tools you could use today, everyone's email kind of looks that way around like relevance and personalization. And so I think that's why around 2022, around like April or May of that year, things just stopped working. And unfortunately, we had to, restructure our go-to-market team. And coincidentally, this was right when ChatGPT came out. But what happened around that time in late 2022 is we started to run what I would call unconventional go-to-market experiments, where we had myself, the go-to-market leader, we had ChatGPT, and then we had a full-time virtual assistant. And then just these limited amount of resources and a very lean team, we're able to run a high velocity of experiments. And 6 months after we made that pivot, what we found is that the best experiments were anything that was tied to an existing relationship. So whether that's existing customer, investors, alumni, former employees, and then we also realized is that we had a higher quality of leads, but less quantity of leads, and the amount of our pipeline did not change. Going from a lean team to like a fully staffed team. And so now this kind of brings us to this new epiphany I've had over the last few weeks, is that when we were doing outbound for a lot of our clients, we realized that we would be generating a lot of leads, but the client would have a hard time really taking action. And let's say they did book a meeting, they would have this huge pool of leads that's just sitting there and it's stuck in nurture phase. And so this epiphany that I have now tied to this AI efficiency versus AI effectiveness is that you don't need more leads and more tools. You actually need fewer tools, better enablement, and more experimentation. And think about less of just generating the lead, but how do you actually focus on nurturing that lead to further stages of the funnel? So that's a much bigger problem to solve. And so I'll pause there because I wanted to kind of give you the full spectrum of how I think about AI and where we've come and where we're going.
Dude, okay, there's two things that automatically I'm like, me as a revenue leader, I want to know, so I'm sure plenty other listening are also going to know this. You were on really the front line of that transition of what a lean team looked like in order for you to experiment more. I think that is one of the biggest blockers of most GTM teams today, is just because they don't have that first principle thinking where how can we do this differently? Are we structured the right way? And I agree with you completely. I think the whole GTM engineer, everybody says oh, it's a weird name, it's going to go away. I'm like, no, it's not. Because what I actually think a good GTM engineer is going to do is exactly what you talked about, is they're going to create the whole flywheel. Most of our campaigns have been acquisition focused. None of our campaigns have ever been, well, if they're not in acquisition, what do we do next? Right? What does nurture look like? What does warming up that lead look like? So I want to dig in that first, man. Is what was some of your experience, your lessons learned of going from a very human capital sales-led organization to a much more efficient model that optimized for the funnel conversion, exactly like you're saying?
Yeah. Before I answer your direct question, I do have a slightly contrarian opinion about this go-to-market engineer and how it's risen as a much-needed role in organizations. So I think the go-to-market engineer is definitely right for the right organizations. But what I've noticed is that a lot of these tools like Clay have become so complex that it requires a whole new line item in a company's budget to truly operationalize. And if these self-service SaaS tools actually offered services, you wouldn't need a go-to-market engineer. And also what I'm noticing is that these go-to-market engineers are creating such complex workflows that you have to wonder if the juice is worth the squeeze. And as we think about AI effectiveness versus AI efficiency, I've seen a lot of people brag on LinkedIn about the complexity of their workflow, but I just wonder, is the uplift in conversions or revenue worth all the effort it took to buy all those licenses, build up these workflows, train the reps on how to use it? And so that's kind of how I think about like the need for a go-to-market engineer. But
And
then
to
what
that,
yeah.
real quick to that point, because I agree with you, right? The actual definition of what it means is going to continue to evolve. I think number two, I think where this is how I think about it, right? And I think this is where to that follow-up question I have for you is I've actually, I mean, for example, at Mixmax, I killed our SDR program, right? Because I truly do believe this is what we're SDRs for originally. And keep in mind, we're very SMB mid-market focused. If you're
Yeah.
very enterprise, I still believe like business development reps are necessary. Or if you're just in a very high volume transactional velocity, like there's still justified reasons. But the real reason we hired SDRs in the past was that was our filtering tool. Like, let's
Mhm.
just be honest, y'all, right? Like that's what they
Yeah.
were. And for me, I believe with technology and AI today, we should be able to make that funnel, that top of funnel, much, much more efficient. And so for me, it's okay, well, how can I reallocate that to be more directly tied to revenue? It's cool. Don't have SDRs, you just have more AEs. And where I look at it now, like that go to market engineer is does that SDR budget get reallocated to that one person to like manage the tools, right? Because now you start looking at your tool spend as an offset to what that human capital would have cost. The other way I agree with you completely is everybody loves to show off their complex workflows. But like, let's be honest, like you don't even need that. I think it's less about the complexity of the workflow and it's more about the completion of the flywheel. That's the real
Mhm.
problem of what I would assign a go to market engineer if I was to hire one today. You're responsible for building me pipeline, but more importantly, is you're responsible for making sure that the entire flywheel is connected, right? So I love the debate because this is where I think like everybody has to think a little bit differently now too, right? It's like how are we reallocating our budget now? So that leads to that other question I had for you, right? Is like what did you learn like walking through that transition? Because man, 2022, like you're on the forefront of it.
So to your point about when or if to staff up an SDR team, I'll help you understand about what we were doing before at my last company and how I see it evolving. Where I think the old way of thinking about go to market was what I call push from the seller. But now we're in an age where I call it pull from the buyer. And, the previous way of go to market was push someone into a meeting, but now it's really pull someone in a meeting or start a conversation. And I think if you need to hire an SDR, first of all, you need to make sure the unit economics work in terms of, I think a minimum like 20K plus ACV or super high velocity sales. But like even the role needs to change where they should be thinking about how to identify people who are already in market in some way, because maybe they're either explicitly raising their hand or they're at least leaving some breadcrumbs online, and you need to identify what those breadcrumbs are for your business. But some common ones could be website tracking, content engagement, mentions in a Slack channel. And I think now, because the buyer has so much power to really evaluate a solution and know everything they need to know about a solution before they buy, I think as a seller, you should think, how do I just start a conversation with someone and then push them down the funnel until they're ready to buy, and push them down the funnel with maybe content or, maybe special offers. And like that's why I think just the SDR model has really evolved. I'm not sure that answered your question completely.
Yeah, so tell me that does answer the question. Tell me a little bit more around now of like you transitioned, right? And you built your new go-to-market team that was not even less, I want to focus less around just being efficient, but even more around the experimentation. Because I think that is something that is like critical for go-to-market teams today is like if you're not structured in a way to where you can create the environment to where you should be doing multiple tests, it's going to be very, very hard for you to really succeed, in my view.
Yeah. So that's what I was saying before around it's more about more experimentation and focusing on getting the process right, because you're not going to fix your pipeline problem if you still have a process problem. But to fix that process problem, you need to run experiments. And I really empathize because it's hard for an organization to find who is going to be owning the experimentation process, because salespeople need to just sell now. And then marketing, I think they're just pulled in a lot of different directions. But the way you should be thinking about it is coming up with a list of potential experiments, just throw some spaghetti on the wall, and then start to prioritize which experiments to do first based on what I would call like return on effort. So like which of the experiments, might have the lowest effort, but you have a high confidence they're going to have the biggest impact. And give you an example to make this a little more tactical of what we've seen work is, everyone's about signals at the individual level right now. And, everyone has access to the same signals. But what signals might indicate intent for one company may not indicate intent for your company. An example is, maybe you're looking at who's viewing your LinkedIn profile or website visitor, or who's engaging with competitors' content. And a way to think about this is to do some outbound of these different signals and measure it on leading indicators such as positive reply rate and starting a conversation. And let's say you start with maybe a dozen different signals. Within about a month or so, looking at those metrics around like positive reply rate, conversations, maybe pushing it down the funnel, you could then say, all right, out of these 12 different signals that we're tracking, we found that these 3 or 4 are the biggest indicators of buying intent. And we know this because the conversion rate is highest even before the actual sale. And so that's how we think about like running experiments, prioritizing them, and then focusing on, the few that will push people down the funnel.
So the first thing I think of in this is like, yes, I want to do this, right? The second thing, and I'm sure this is probably the first thing that you run into with either clients today or at that time, your data's got to be clean to be able to really look at that. And so what are maybe like some of the mistakes you made or lessons you've learned? And like, what would you do today if you were starting a team from scratch saying, hey, I need to build this go-to-market team and we need to be very experimental? What are the things you're looking for? Because, right, just like with AI, garbage in, garbage out, bad data is going to lead you in the wrong direction. So I'm just curious, like that was the first thing I thought of, because I get it and I love it. When you actually get those results, it's amazing. But I'm just curious, like, what are some of the things that you've gone through and lessons you've learned?
So to your point around where you should focus on, specifically if you're first starting out with an outbound team, and I'm going to use a scenario where a company might already have a decent pool of customers. And I think so often, both as marketers and sellers, we're just always guessing on what is that offer or asset or that thing to say that is really going to drive conversions. And so the way that I've been thinking about solving this for our own business or even for our clients is go to your pool of customers and try to identify who you call your best or most loyal customers. And even if that data is messy, that could just be about like who's been with us the longest, who's referred people to us, who do you write a case study with, and start to look for patterns, whether it's firmographics around like the size of their sales team or funding or where they're based or their vertical. And then you want to look for what were those key buying triggers that got them to buy or got them to stay longer. And you might be able to decipher this from listening to sales calls or like CS calls, and maybe hear things like, there was a certain dinner I went to that was interesting, or I read this thing, I read this piece of content from this publication, or I've been following your CEO for a while and that's really interesting. And so you're going to start to build this model or profile that you could then create like as a lookalike audience, and then say, all right, well, let's take everything we've learned about our best customers and go back to the top and middle of the funnel and just find those leads that are lookalikes. And then you say, okay, well, now that we say that these people are the best fit, now we can know exactly what to say or what offer or how to push them down the funnel. So instead of guessing on, hey, do we offer someone a free trial or do we send someone, a case study? You'll say, okay, wait, this is what we learned about what were these key buying triggers. And so, maybe someone won't book a meeting with us, but they will sign up to our newsletter or they'll follow our CEO on LinkedIn. And you'll know that these were the key buying triggers that actually push someone down the funnel. So that's what I would think about from a first principle standpoint if I were to do this today, because I think what I've seen as a mistake is that people just don't know where to start. Like, yes, they'll have their ICP, but they're not sure like what to say. They're not sure what kind of offers to do. They're not sure which marketing assets to send. And then another mistake that I see a lot of people make is when they first do outbound, they are expecting a home run within those first like 3 months. And what I tell the folks is that you may not get a grand slam or a home run, but you should start to figure out what's a single look like, what's a double look like. Because especially if your sales cycle is long, you can't expect a deal to be closed when you first launch an outbound campaign in 3 months. But maybe you could say, okay, well, the key KPIs for this is like how many people are going to sign up to our newsletter, or how many people are going to, follow our company page, how many people are going to book a meeting with us, or whatever key indicators that you think will signal that you're on the right path to converting someone from a window shopper to a loyal customer.
I love that. I completely agree, right? I mean, and what I hear from what you're saying is, it's what I love about this shift that's happening in this market is that we're just aligning the sales process with the buying process, right? For too long, we've treated sales as a linear journey and we've forced our customers to adhere to our process. We could get away with that. And that's because buyers only did about 50% of their research before they came and talked to sales. They still came and talked to us to like finalize their education piece before they even go into selection. Where now buyers, they know what they want. They've done their research, almost 85% of it before they even come talk to sales. So it's like, if you're trying to be like top of funnel focus when they're already like middle way through the funnel, like y'all are just on two polar opposite ends of the world. And so I love that because I believe everything comes down to ICP, right? But you took it even a level further where I think where most people stop at ICP is the very firmographic, right? Oh, they have this many employees, this revenue. But what I want to know is like, where do they hang out? And wherever they hang out, what are they talking about? And this is also part of why I like the whole change of like GEO versus SEO, because people aren't searching keywords anymore. They're actually searching, how do I solve this problem? And I think that's the exciting part, that when go-to-market teams do this the right way, you're actually creating a better community. You're creating better relationships. And to your point, it's now not a numbers game, which was the history of the top of the funnel. It's now making sure like, are we getting the right quantity and the right quality? Is the right mix there? So that leads, I loved that, right? But we also went very, very like almost like infrastructure focus, where I want to pull this back a little bit on the team side. You've talked about, teams creating work for the sake of work, right? Just in this example, I agree with you with signals. Signals are noise unless you know how to stack those signals to actually understand what journey is this telling me about the customer. And what that I see that leads to today is like creating work for work, right? I get spammed all the time where it's like, oh, you came to my website and let me sell you something. And I'm like, that doesn't mean I'm actually buying. So how do you see AI amplifying this problem, but potentially on the team side of like creating work for the sake of work?
Yeah. I think AI makes the problem worse in a multitude of ways. And I treat my email inbox as the canary in the coal mine, because I'm a solo founder, very small business. Yet even little old me probably gets 10 or 20 of these really bad, what I call clay and spray emails or LinkedIn connection requests every day. And what I find so ironic is that the data and the technology has never been better, but for some reason the targeting is still really bad. And that brings me back to what I said before, that it's not about your tech stack, it's about your process. So for all these really bad messages that I'm getting every day, I'm curious, like, what the heck was their process to think that I was someone that was matching their ICP and showing signals? Because, I'm sure you get a lot of these today that will say, oh, I saw that you were engaging with XYZ content you want to buy my stuff? When I'm like, okay, well, because I engage with that content, that doesn't mean I'm a buyer for what you're selling right now. And also, I don't even think I match the ICP. And then also the issue with AI creating more noise is it's pretty easy for someone to prompt into ChatGPT all the possible ideas or signals or offers that they could make. And because the cost to execute has dropped so significantly, companies think they could do everything everywhere all at once. And that just creates more noise and less effectiveness because you're not doing any one of those things extremely well. It's just not possible.
So I'm curious, when you think about the efficiency and effectiveness, especially with AI amplifying it, right? 9 times out of 10, I feel like it's because we're still focusing on the wrong metrics, right? You just talked about it, right? It's like the top of the funnel of like lead volume, demo requests versus actual like conversion metrics. So like, how do you identify that, right? If like you notice that there's potentially a team that is being efficient with AI, but highly ineffective, like how do you identify when they're actually optimizing around the wrong metrics potentially, or the wrong process?
Yeah, that's tricky because if you think about the true North Star, especially with today's macro environment, it's about NRR and less about ARR. But NRR is a lagging indicator, and it may take months, if not years, to truly measure. And this is what I was going back before about talking about what were those key buying triggers that turned someone into a very loyal customer. And then what you would look at is what were those leading indicators of retention to get to someone to become even a customer. And I know you talk about is the key metric about a certain stage of the funnel, or is it about like demo request? I think all of those things matter. But again, if you could say that, hey, we know that someone will more likely become a high-paying customer for us if they get to this part of our product, or if they attend this in-person event, or our CEO makes some really stellar content on LinkedIn and people really rave about it. And if we get someone to follow our CEO for at least 30 days, they'll see at least 10 pieces of content, and that will start to intrigue them about what we do. And so in addition to thinking about like positive reply rates, meeting booked, pushing someone to like stage 1 to a stage 2, you would also say, all right, well, these 5 things that we know will turn someone into a very loyal customer. Once we check all these 5 things off, the close rate goes from like 10% to 20%. And when they become a customer, we know that they have like a much higher chance of staying with us longer. And so that's how I would think about solving this when NRR is the North Star. But what are the other leading indicators of retention that you should be focusing on to know that you're on the path to turning someone from a window shopper to a high NRR customer?
So I agree with you, especially on the NRR side, right? And there's 2 thoughts that came to mind while I was listening to you. I think number one is this is also the infrastructure changes that are being required of go-to-market teams today. And what I mean by that is like the more matrix organization. I think to that point is we've looked at the revenue bow tie in isolated views, and we've measured them in isolated views, where now I think the right go-to-market teams that are efficient and effective are actually looking at it like, cool. So for example, at Mixmax, like we look at, from a performance perspective, you look at the calendar month. From a quality perspective, we look at the cohort. Because I want to know of that inbound funnel, like if like of all the demo requests that came in this X month or this X time period, what was the funnel conversion like from them? Of those that we converted, let's say it's a year ago, I now want to understand what's our retention of those, because you can start to see, is my profile getting better? Is it getting worse? And where do we actually to make changes in our strategy? Because to your point, is too often we look at it as a silver bullet and it's reactive, and we expect these results to come overnight. Where I think when you're looking at the right metrics from the right lens, you can start to actually kind of predict of where you're going and course correct before it becomes a problem, right? And so,
Yeah.
man, I love this. I want to nerd out for a second, right? Because we've already almost talked like 30 minutes. You wrote a really good article about company A versus company B, right? And I think just like from the example you gave just now of like efficient versus inefficient, we've kind of gone back and across the board. But like, tell us about like the company A versus company B, because I think this is a really good example when we're talking about efficiency versus effectiveness.
Yeah. So I think about like the way two companies would think about their go-to-market, where one of them is focusing a lot on the process and the other one is just focusing on pipeline, get as many leads as possible. And what I see so many times with the company that is just focusing on volume and pipeline is they'll buy some kind of lead gen tool, and they will just do everything they can to like get as many leads as possible. And let's just use website tracking as an example, because you brought it up, where they'll buy this website tracking tool, they'll get a bunch of leads, and then everyone that comes in will just get a blast automated email saying, hey, saw you on our website, do you want to buy our stuff? Or maybe it's something more educational. And then they realize that after a while, those replies start to slow down and they can't figure out why. And it's probably because that that same play has become so oversaturated that people no longer even pay attention to it. And then they're saying, okay, well, this is not working, so let's blame this lead gen tool. And they'll just like cancel the lead gen tool. And then they're just back to square one of saying, okay, well, now we don't have as many leads. We need to buy like another tool. And it's just this doom loop, where the company that's really focusing on the process is they're always continuously running experiments in the background, because they're aware that no matter what play is performing well today, that every play, no matter how high performing it will be, will eventually depreciate. And so they know that they're running a play, it's working really well. Then maybe a few months from now, it'll stop working, but that's okay because they have another experiment that's really taking off. And they're focusing on, once all of these plays start to perform really well, like what's the way to really build processes around that? So going from generating the lead to deploying into your existing workflow to sending it off to a rep who knows what to do next. And the company that's really focusing on process and experimentation is just always diversifying the risk in their pipeline and not relying on one tool to be the silver bullet.
I'm going to ask you a follow-up question because I'm curious of your response first before I give you like my thoughts. I believe the definition of like being process oriented has been given the wrong name. And so I'm curious from your perspective, when you talk about being process oriented, what does that mean to you?
Process oriented. I think part of it is having as much passion for the idea as you have for passion for the execution, and thinking less about how do we buy the fanciest tool, but say agnostic to the technology, what is the process that we want to create? And we're in a world where our creativity is the only limitation. So if you could imagine something, it's a good chance that we could execute because of the availability of data and technology. So think about like end to end, like what is the process? And then say, all right, now let's work backwards and say, what is the tool that we need in that process? Instead of just trying to have FOMO and just going after the shiny object or going after every like lead magnet that you see that has a cool play that you want to run.
Love that. I'm 100% in alignment, by the way. I think the bad definition or the wrong definition around process, and the reason I get to ask this all the time, just because of like the 1 to 100 million revenue range. I mean, 10 to million, is, are you too process oriented? And for me, process oriented is I think the theme around it today is like you are a rule book, step 1, step 2, step 3. In my view, process oriented is exactly what you're talking about. You have to be process oriented, meaning you know what type of customer you want to close, you know how you want to go after them. You experiment is in the how. How do I get their attention? How do I
Mm.
actually get them? What's the process that I need to evolve or pivot and change in order to create that better relationship and that connection? Where results oriented or outcome oriented is like, this is my pipeline number, right? I'm going to execute, hit my head against the wall. But like, my goal is the result. Where when your goal is the process, your goal is not, can I get 5 of those customers in my funnel? It's, this is my ideal customer. How can I get as many of them in the funnel to want to talk to me? And that forces me to focus on the relationship, the journey, and the process. So
Yeah.
love that you said
Yeah,
that.
like you were saying earlier, it all starts with the ICP,
Mhm.
but then it's saying, all right, once we identify the ICP, what are those buying triggers or assets that we know will push them down the funnel to become a loyal customer?
Well, it's just like I always use a GPS analogy, right? Is when you used to look at a map, you would find one way to get that destination and you made your decision, right? That is execution. That is results oriented in my view. Technology today has allowed us to drive with the GPS from a process oriented perspective, meaning here's your final destination. Here's 10 different routes that you can take. Oh, you don't want to use tolls? Here's 5 different routes that you can take. The ultimate goal is still the end destination, but I now have different ways to achieve that, right? That's how I
Mm.
look at it from like a process versus like results oriented, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you had mentioned something earlier around the flywheel effect and
Mm-hmm.
thinking of the customer life cycle as a bow tie. I wanted to share a more tactical example of the power of optimizing for NRR and then how you could bring that back as a flywheel for the top of the funnel.
Yeah.
And we've seen this work with a lot of companies, but I'll be specific and talk about a Series C B2B SaaS company that had a free trial option. Um, and what they saw is that after a few months of someone using their product, there are very clear indicators if someone is quote unquote a power user. And they also had a referral program. But the issue with most referral programs is that they're very like reactive, where most people have to toggle their brain to think about who they want to refer, and most people just don't even take the time to even refer someone. And then the second issue is just very unpredictable. So one of the things that they experimented with to make referrals more predictable is they identified their power users and they got them to opt in to a referral program. And then they started with a pool of, let's say, around like 100 of these power users who opted into this program. And then they mapped the relationships of those power users to find people who matched their ICP, who they used to work with. And then they sent an outbound message that was something like, hey, Heath, I saw you used to work with Richard. Richard is one of our power users of our app. Do you want to check us out? And they just saw that this was one of their highest performing experiments when it came to positive reply rates and then people converting at higher rates and becoming better customers. Because again, they're just going back to their high NRR or their most loyal customers. And so just gives you an example that's a little more tactical about the importance of thinking about the full life cycle.
I love that. I completely agree. It's actually like I'll use Mixmax as a direct example too. Previous users of Mixmax that join new organizations, our win rate's like 85%. And so what we do is we actually track that, right? If they've left Mixmax, they were a previous user, let's say they join a new organization, but we don't just then spray and pray like, hey, you joined a new company, right? Like everybody hates that. I hate it whenever I join a new organization. Like the first 3 months is just nothing but spam coming in my inbox. But what we do is we then look at the overall journey. Has somebody else at their company come to our website? Has somebody else at their company looked at our content? Has this person looked at our content? Because if I'm able to say, for example, we just launched our meeting copilot. And if I'm able to connect that somebody's looking up the content related to meeting note takers or conversational intelligence. Like my outreach is now much more personalized because I probably have a pretty good idea. They're trying to solve for a meeting co-pilot, a meeting note taker. So like, let me be that actual like advisor to them. That's where I see this is changing. And to your point, the full flywheel is like, okay, we engage them, but we don't convert. Well, okay, how do we then nurture that person? Because just because they said no today doesn't mean it's a no tomorrow. So how do we continue to build our brand in that relationship with them? It's so much easier said than done, but when done well, man, it's fun. Like that's why I love the SMB and mid-market space, because this is the engine, right? This is like the true go-to-market engine, is like when you can really build this, and this is when it's fun. So I love that you gave that example, man. Super, super tactical.
Yeah.
I want to get a little bit more tactical with you too, right? Is like, if I'm a sales leader listening to this, and I really like, when I was listening to you, I'll be honest, in my mind, I'm like, okay, I see how they did this. I see how they did this. Okay, how did they actually go and map the relationships? Okay, you got LinkedIn Sales Nav. Like I started thinking through the actual technical implications. But if I'm listening to this and I have no idea, I love what you said, but I have no idea how to get there, and I want to actually use AI effectively, but not just efficiently, what is your recommended approach? Like, what are maybe like the 3 things that I should be thinking about or doing?
Well, I think because of how easy it is to access information now, I think part of it could just be following some really thoughtful people online. I mean, one of my most favorite is Jordan Crawford. And quick toot of my own horn, our Moxie GTM Substack newsletter. Every few weeks, we release step-by-step instructions that people could follow to execute any of these experiments on their own. And something else I would think about solving this. I would just say, like, there's just a lot of YouTube videos and just LinkedIn content of people who just give really explicit instructions. That's how I would think about starting. Because I think from there, with a combination of content you find online plus prompting ChatGPT, I think there's a lot of great opportunities to just get really explicit with instructions to executing these experiments.
All right. I want to do like a quick fire on a couple, and we're almost at 45 minutes. So I want to be respectful of your time.
Okay.
All right. First one, what's the biggest AI efficiency trap that you see most sales teams fall into?
One of my biggest beefs right now with AI SDRs is that people are confusing AI with automation that has been around for like 10 plus years. And, sending a specific email to someone who replies to an email is just automation. There's no AI around that.
Then logic, homie.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's some really powerful use cases for AI SDR. I just have not seen it work well if you're selling up market to senior leaders. But I think if you're selling to like SMB high volume, I think AI SDRs can work.
All right. On the personal side, like, because you obviously experiment a lot with different AI tools, like, how do you know when AI is actually helping you versus hurting your effectiveness?
Our philosophy is that AI is best to automate the research, but AI is not best to automate the outbound and do like mass blasts and make some guesses on relevance and personalization based on some AI prompts. And so I know that AI works really well when it gives me a highly curated list of a small volume of leads that I know are the warmest, hottest leads because of some reason. And maybe they'll give you a reason because of like their content engagement or any other signals. And then what I've seen work the best is the human seller reaches out to that highly curated list of leads and adds a level of authenticity and humanity that AI just could not replicate. And so this is what we do even for our own business, is like we dog food our own product to create a highly curated list of leads. And then what I do is I actually go out and like touch those people like one-to-one, spend 3 to 5 minutes personalizing each message. And we've just seen this have a much higher conversion rate. Like, yes, it's much lower volume, but just the quality is much higher.
Yep. Okay. How do I ask this? Like, do you think AI will eventually solve the effectiveness problem, or will human judgment will always be required?
I've thought about this a lot, and I'm skeptical that AI can solve the last mile of execution, especially for very complex tasks. So if there's not a lot of nuance to the task or complexity, I think AI can do it end to end. But I think the human brain can't quite imagine what artificial general intelligence can do, AGI. But I think like for highly complex enterprise sales or for super high priced ticket items, I think humans will need to be in the loop. And I think those buyers would still prefer to talk to a human. What I think will change is, like you had mentioned, that they'll wait the longest they can as possible before they talk to a human. But I think in the end, to get the deal over the line or to support that deal after it's been closed, those people still want to talk to a human.
Last question: What should revenue leaders be preparing for? The market is changing like crazy, right? So what should we be what should we be preparing for?
I think that because it's easier and cheaper to build and scale SaaS companies than ever before, what we're going to see is even more SaaS companies out there that will be created, which means more competition. But at the same time, I don't think that the demand for SaaS and AI will match the supply of AI and SaaS that's out there in the market, which means that revenue leaders should expect slower growth rates and also plateau at, let's say, $5 or $10 million in ARR. But I think like in a very short period of time, what we're going to see is a lot of very lean, sustainable AI SaaS companies that get to roughly $5 or $10 million in revenue, very lean teams. And from there, they just kind of coast. But because they're profitable, they're able to coast. And I think a lot of buyers will not be able to see the differentiation of all these brands. And they'll just decide to work with a certain brand because they like the founder or they like the content. And so I think revenue leaders should think about, okay, well, how do we think differently about the growth rate, which means that we need to focus more on NRR. And also, how do we differentiate based on our brand and based on customer experience? Because like I mentioned before, there is a group of buyers that still prefer to buy from humans and engage with humans. And so perhaps the way to differentiate is just having superior customer experience, where maybe you offer services with a human, or there's a high touch to your customer experience. So the sales experience is just so much better. And so that's how I would think about the future and how revenue leaders should differentiate.
Love that. Man, this conversation has been amazing. It's really challenged the assumptions that more AI equals better results, right? Which is like, I feel like the common misconception today. So for listeners who want to, audit their own AI implementation, like even personally, right? Like that's the first thing I do before I try to put new AI into my go-to-market orgs. I put it in my own life first, and I'm like, does it actually help me? But like, where should they start if they actually want to like audit their AI implementations to see like, is this actually effective, or should I scrap this and go back to the drawing board?
So you're asking that how someone could just audit their existing AI tools to figure out if the juice is worth the squeeze?
Yeah. So, I mean, not even AI tools, but like, let's just look at it from like the outbound campaign perspective. Is like, how do I look at if I, for some reason, bought into the crave and I went and bought a bunch of different things, or I deployed a bunch of different campaigns, like what's your recommendation of where should I go to actually see of like, am I being efficient and not effective? And like, what are some of the things I should start looking at?
Yeah. I would think about looking at your tech stack to figure out where are the one point solutions where there's just too many gaps in execution. And I'm going to use website tracking as an example. I'm not picking on website tracking. I think it's really valuable, but this is a lot of what I hear from people using these types of tools is they'll get a bunch of leads of people who are on their website, but once they get those leads, there's no enrichment of ICP. There's no deployment into their existing workflow. There's no cross-referencing that website tracking signal with some other signal. And so just look at those tools that are missing critical gaps that you are having a hard time operationalizing. And then, probably the stuff that's pretty easy to suss out is just, which tools are getting the most adoption from your team, because there's just so many self-service SaaS tools that are sitting on the shelf and not even being used.
Man, appreciate the time that you gave today. Really appreciate the insights. So for any sales leaders that are ready to move beyond the efficiency trap and build truly effective AI-powered go-to-market strategies, they can go to your website, which is moxiegtm.com, right?
Correct,
Awesome.
yes.
And Richard's team can help companies identify the difference between busy work and breakthrough work, which is more critical than ever right now in an AI world. And for our listeners and Mixmax users, this conversation highlights why our platform continues to focus on intelligent automation, not just efficient automation. Features like AI sequence building, smart send timing, these are all designed to enhance that effectiveness, to help making sure that our users are sending the right message at the right time, not just more messages faster. So we need to remember, in the age of AI, the winners are not going to be the teams doing the most things efficiently. They'll be the teams doing the right things effectively. So I appreciate everybody for joining us on Mixology, where we blend strategy, technology, and human insight for maximum revenue impact. Thanks a lot, everybody.